Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I now hand you over to today's moderator, Dr. Claire Grant.
Good morning, all. Good morning to everyone who's here from all across the region. It's a very important day for media generally across the world, but particularly for our region where we, by virtue of the nature and the context that we live in, the whole issue of media and press freedom is of great importance to us. Before getting into the program itself, I just would want to put on the table that there are many things that impact press freedom. There has been, over the years, tends to be a general concentration around the death of journalists and journalists having issues while working and things being taken from them in terms of their cameras and other equipment. But it is so important, now more than ever, for the industry and the region in particular to understand that there are a range of other things that have an impact on press freedom. And more than anything else, I'm hoping that our discussions today will highlight some of these issues and allow us to actually bring some sort of thought around action around how we can protect and ensure that press freedom in the region is maintained. So without further ado, we're going to kick off with a word from our president for the Caribbean Broadcasting Union. That's none other than our Mr. Anthony Green. I'll just tell you a little bit about him for those who don't know him, which should not be many people, but let us still make sure that everyone is aware. Anthony Green is a senior executive with more than 2 decades of experience in broadcast and print media. He's currently the general manager at Starcom Network in Barbados, which has 4 radio stations and is one of the leading broadcast stations in that island. Before he was made general manager, he had the post of programming and content manager for 5 years, 2016 to 2021. And he also serves as a director on the boards of the Caribbean Broadcasting Union, Innogen Technologies, and Pearl Dance Academy. So without further ado, turn over to Mr. Anthony Green to bring welcome from the CBU.
Thank you very much, Dr. Claire, and great to have you hosting. Good to see you. Good morning to everyone. On behalf of my colleague directors and the entire membership of the CBU, I'm honored to welcome all of you joining us live or reviewing the recording of today's event to celebrate UNESCO's World Press Freedom Day 2026. We are here today as a further demonstration of CBU's focus on relevance and impact. As an organization that looks forward to soon celebrating 6 decades of existence, yes, it will be easy, of course, to rest on our laurels, of which there are many. But the CBU recognizes it cannot be static, especially in such an inherently dynamic sector. Each and every member of the CBU, whether legacy media service, new media operator, broadcast regulator, communications and media trainer, or researcher, is challenged by the context in which we operate both at the global and regional level. This event is a part of the CBU's response to the recent developments with which we have been confronted globally and regionally. Allow me to briefly quote the UNESCO World Trends Report in Freedom of Expression and Media Development 2022 to 2025. And I quote, freedom of expression around the world has declined by 10% since 2012, alongside a wide range of interwoven issues, the intensification of armed conflicts, the information manipulation and interference by malicious actors, including the use of AI, using AI, weakening trust, shared understanding, and national security, the contraction of civic space marked by a reported 48% increase in efforts to control or restrict media, persistent violence against journalists in a context where 85% of killings remain unpunished, the growing economic fragility of independent media linked to the concentration of over 54% of global advertising revenues within digital platforms, and deep disruptions on information ecosystems driven by digital platforms and artificial intelligence, with 40% of users already relying on AI to create or modify content. These deteriorating conditions have led to an estimated 63% increase in self-censorship since 2012, driven by fear of reprisals, online harassment, judicial intimidation, and economic pressure, end quote. Here in our region, we've seen this playing out in a severe contraction of the media sector. We've all heard of and lamented in recent months high-profile closures of national and regional media services, including Sportsmax, Loop Caribbean, Newsday Trinidad and Tobago, Starbrook News Guyana, and iNews Cayman Islands. And the RJR Gleaner Communications Group in Jamaica has suspended 2 of its radio services. These are dire circumstances, but in the Caribbean, we like to say resilience is our middle name, right? So even as they extend support to their hard-hit colleagues, CBU members have given the union's leadership the mandate to explore positive pathways using the collective experience, expertise, and wisdom. For CBU, protecting the viability of legacy media is not just a nice to have, it's a must. Without indigenous, values-driven media as a region, we will not be able to preserve our culture, our natural environment, our economies. So we are putting the power of joint action to use. Firstly, as members, we are collecting intelligence on what are the key factors affecting our operations. The CBU Annual Assembly is always a forum for frank and constructive discussion on our sector, but we are extending a special request to each and every member attending the 57th CBU Assembly from August 17th to 19th in Georgetown, Guyana. Whether you are a full or associate member, come armed with a concise and data-supported report on the status of the media business in your country, your territory. And I'm very happy about the opportunity that this gives you. You're invited to make the written version as fulsome as possible, while you'll present the highlights verbally during the members-only session. That information will serve as the basis of a State of the Caribbean Media Report to be published by the end of 2026. The CBU Secretariat will soon be issuing detailed guidance on this. Secondly, we'll be collaborating with regional and international partners to ensure our members have the benefit of access to relevant resources on one of the major challenges and opportunities for this sector. The Asia Pacific Broadcasting Union, ABU, has established an online portal of resources for its members on artificial intelligence. This AI hub was created to provide ABU members with a shared platform for learning, exchange, and collaboration. It is designed to help media organizations adopt AI ethically and effectively. It brings together ABU's non-binding AI principles, member case studies, practical examples, and regular updates, enabling media services to learn from one another's experiences. The platform is guided by the motto, governing intelligence, securing trust. And I'm pleased to announce that as a sister union under the World Broadcasting Union, the ABU has generously granted access to this hub to CBU members. Further information will be shared with CBU members directly from the Secretariat. It is through actions like these we will be able to continue to confront the risks and exploit the opportunities facing CBU members. I'm truly pleased so many of you have agreed to join us today, and I look forward to the expert and well-informed presentations from our partners. Here's to a productive and impactful session. Thank you.
Hey, thank you very much, President Anthony, who has basically set the framework around which we will be discussing this very, very important topic for the industry. I see the room is filling up as we're going. I'm hearing the doors open and people join, seeing a lot of familiar names, and also realizing that we're having good coverage from all the various territories across the region. Just a little housekeeping before I introduce the next speaker. Yes, if you have questions on anything as we're going along, please feel free to type into the chat. Even what has been presented here as opening by President Green has triggered some thought, so if you have anything, feel free to make note of it and put it in the chat. We're now going to hear from the Vice President of CARICHAM, Ms. Petipha Lewis. Ms. Petipha Lewis is a Grenadian national who currently serves as the chair of the network of Caribbean Chambers of Commerce, CARICHAM, and is executive director and secretary to the board of directors of the Grenada Chamber of Industry and Commerce. Ms. Lewis holds a master's degree in business administration from the University of the West Indies and is also an accredited director with certification from the Chartered Governance Institute of Canada. She has experience working in both private and public sectors. So without further ado, we are going to hand over to get welcoming remarks or just remarks from Ms. Petipha Lewis.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you to the CBU for the invitation to join this important conversation and to be part of such a distinguished panel. Now, I just want to make some remarks of some contribution about the viability of media in the Caribbean and navigating the digital age. I think we will all agree that the viability of media in the Caribbean is an urgent issue. And when we talk about viability, we mean more than just financial health. We're also talking about the ability of media organizations to produce independent, high-quality, fact-based journalism while remaining economically self-sufficient and operational sustainable. I would like to share some thoughts on a few areas. The current environment, we see that media is operating in an environment where local media houses face shrinking margins. Information flows into a region much faster than we can interpret or contextualize it. People can now get their information or news immediately from global networks and no longer have to rely on the slower process of information going to local media houses, being interpreted and then produced for their consumption. Many now consume information or news from WhatsApp and YouTube. It is not always vetted, and it is sometimes outright false. Now, this raises questions about the credibility of information sources and the impact of misinformation in small societies. Artificial intelligence, as mentioned by Mr. Green, is flooding online channels and fundamentally changing the economies and modalities of journalism, news reporting, and consumption. Caribbean media, in these changing times, we believe that a strong, independent, and pluralistic media is essential to Caribbean democracy, to our economic development, and to our social cohesion. The traditional revenue models based on advertising and subscription are on the strain. According to one newspaper in Grenada, Since COVID, the private sector has cut back on advertising in the newspapers, instead choosing to use their social media channel to market directly and more efficiently to their target audience. Digital platforms now capture the majority of activity. This was also evident in discussion in CBU's previous webinar on traditional versus social media, where businesses are now using social media to promote or sell their products and services, relying less and less on traditional media. Speaking at a Connected Caribbean event in Grenada in last December, Beverly Woodin, regional development expert, noted that, and I quote, Caribbean businesses and governments are still advertising to reach their audiences. However, the economic flows from that investment are now largely being directed outside of the Caribbean to major technology platforms. This is a net loss for local media houses that once relied on those advertising dollars, and a net loss to the local economy that rely on that capital remaining in our local economies. So, as a consequence of the shifting economic of media production and publication we have seen over the past 2 years, the closing, as mentioned before, of some key media houses, some of them after 32 years of service. Now, this closure represents a deep structural crisis in Caribbean media, significantly impacting the regional media landscape. This closure of legacy Caribbean newsroom creates news deserts, which fundamentally alters how information flows into and out of the region. When local gatekeepers disappear, the remaining narrative space is often filled by international agencies that may lack the cultural nuance and regional priorities necessary for balanced reporting. External news agencies often rely on what we refer to as centralized wire service model. Without local competitors to challenge their framing, a single perspective can become the dominant global truth about a Caribbean event, or a dominant shaper of Caribbean perspective on global events. We are fully into the digital age. Social media has officially become the primary news gateway for most people, reaching a transformational tipping point globally in 2025. This shift from online first websites to social first app is now the established normal, particularly among the younger audiences. Recent data shows that for the first time, social media has overtaken both TV and news websites as the primary source of news in major markets. The evidence is clear. Audiences are shifting to short-form content like TikToks, Reels, YouTube Shorts. Audiences seem to have a much shorter attention span now, and the demand for immediacy is overtaking the desire for depth of analysis. But this creates a dangerous gap where the preference is for speed over accuracy and for global narratives over local or regional news. Now, what are the implications if the Caribbean media becomes non-viable? Now, who will interpret global events for our people? Who will hold regional governments and institutions accountable? Who will tell Caribbean stories through a Caribbean lens? Without viable Caribbean media, we become consumers of the views of others rather than producers of an indigenous perspective. Now, does the state or CARICHAM have a role to play? There are no easy answers, but all is not lost. However, real effort is required. In closing, let me just say that The viability of the Caribbean media is not just a media issue, it is a development issue. We must act collectively. Governments, the private sector, media practitioners, and regional institutions. Because if we fail to build sustainable media ecosystems, we risk losing control of our narrative, our policy discourse, and ultimately our development trajectory. The opportunity is there, not just to survive, but to redefine Caribbean media for the digital age. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lewis. And as we continue to build on this discussion, we're getting various insights into the issues that are relevant for us to be discussing this morning. We're going to move quickly along to remarks from UNESCO, the UNESCO Caribbean Regional Representative, as President Green would have indicated, the recognition of this important issue for our industry has been spearheaded by UNESCO for many years now with the recognition of World Press Freedom Day. So we're going to be hearing from Mr. Eric Falt, who is a French senior official at United Nations, recently appointed as the head of the Caribbean Office of UNESCO, which is based in Jamaica at the International Seabed Authority building. Prior to his current appointment, he served as the director of the UNESCO Office for Maghreb and UNESCO's representative in Morocco, Algeria, Libya, Mauritius, and Tunisia. He's also held senior level positions at the UN, including as the director of the UNESCO New Delhi office between 2018 and 2022. He has also served as the Assistant Director General for External Relations and Public Information at UNESCO's headquarters in Paris between 2010 and 2018. Without further ado, we will hear from Mr. Falt.
Thank you very much, Claire, for this generous but probably too long introduction. Anyway, good morning, colleagues, friends, and partners across the Caribbean. On behalf of UNESCO and together with our team here based in Kingston, it is really a pleasure to join the Caribbean Broadcasting Union for this very important World Press Freedom Day conversation. We've already had a number of events and a lot of activities related to World Press Freedom Day this year, and I'm glad that we are engaging again with CBU. So thank you to President Anthony Green and Secretary General Sonia Gale for the invitation to attend. I'm sure we all agree that actually this is the moment every year, World Press Freedom Day, when we come together to be reminded of this so important principle that free, independent, pluralistic, and professional journalism is essential to democracy, to human rights, to peace and sustainable development. And that's why we chose the overall theme this year to focus on this. As you know, the global celebrations are taking place as we speak in Zambia, but there are events all over the world. And in the Caribbean today, we've already heard a little bit already some of the importance of this issue. We really must go further than this. We must speak not only about the freedom of the press, but also about the conditions that make a free press possible. This is important because the press can be legally free, as it is in most part, if not all parts of the Caribbean, but still be structurally fragile. It can be constitutionally protected, yet still be economically weakened. And it's something that we really see all over the world, but specifically probably in the Caribbean. And I want to get back to that in a moment. Freedom of the press can be respected in principle, yet unable to sustain the journalists, the editors, the newsrooms, also the transmitters, the platforms that are also important, the community connections that make public interest journalism real. This is a big challenge before us. You may have seen, and if you haven't, I invite you to look at it, UNESCO's World Trends Report on freedom of expression and media development. And quite clearly, it paints a very sobering global picture. Since 2012, we have established that freedom of expression has declined globally by around 10%. And there are reasons for it. The report, again, UNESCO report, which is readily available online, points to rising conflict, of course, legal intimidation, online harassment, but also all sorts of elements that were not discussed so much in the past. Disinformation and misinformation have become so threatening. AI-enabled manipulation is something that we see now every day that essentially did not exist 2 years ago, even a year ago. Declining trust also, and the growing economic fragility of independent traditional media. These are not only global trends, they are truly Caribbean realities. Across the region, we see that the traditional news media landscape is shrinking. You may have seen I had an opportunity to publish an op-ed in the Jamaica Gleaner and in Barbados, The Nation, about that. We see actually an incredible shrinking of the news media. Newspapers across the region are reducing print editions or consolidating operations. We see that radio stations are operating with smaller newsrooms. Some digital and legacy services have closed. Others are restructuring. There's a lot of merging of services, and everybody's trying to survive in increasingly difficult markets. And sometimes it's difficult to see it because this disappearance is often gradual. It's not necessarily something that happens overnight. We see a newsroom losing a senior reporter and not being replaced, a weekly paper reducing its frequency, an investigative desk quietly disappearing. That happens, unfortunately, a lot. Or a community radio station going silent because funding has dried up. Each step may seem manageable in isolation, but together, each one of these steps represents a serious contraction of journalistic capacity. And we know at UNESCO, certainly, that when journalism contracts, democracy contracts with it. The silence that follows is not only informational, it signals a silencing of democracy. And that is why media viability must be treated as a press freedom issue. I think we ourselves have seen that in the past we were couching the issues related to world press freedom only in terms of the threats to journalists, but we must go much beyond that. And certainly, again, as we consider the region, we know that in smaller Caribbean markets, media houses face limited economies of scale. Advertising revenue has moved in a majority way to global digital platforms. Audiences are more fragmented, and journalists are being asked to do more with less, which is often not possible or reduces the quality of journalism. So these are all concrete pressures we know that can affect independence. They can narrow editorial ambition. They can reduce investigative work that I've just mentioned. They can make smaller outlets more vulnerable to political or commercial pressure. Press freedom, therefore, and again, I'm repeating myself a little bit, I realize, but it's important to say, is not only about preventing censorship, it is also, yes, about ensuring that viable, independent media institutions exist in the first place. And there's another Caribbean dimension that we need to talk about that we cannot ignore, and that is climate vulnerability. Very important issue, and more so. We have seen over the last several years that this is a growing factor. For small island developing states, disaster resilience has become a big issue. We have seen, we're based in Kingston, but everybody in the region can be affected. We've seen that when hurricanes impact, like Hurricane Melissa, it creates all sorts of it has all sorts of impact. Power outages, which happen immediately, and telecommunications failures occur just when affected people need verified, timely, and life-saving information. We know that the people affected need to be aware where shelters are located, which roads are open, where relief is available, what rumors are false, and what official guidance can be trusted. Indeed, when Melissa hit the region, not just Jamaica, but other islands as well, we worked closely with a lot of the partners. Here we worked especially closely with the Broadcasting Commission of Jamaica. Our friend Cordel Green is, of course, on the line today. We worked also with others and found that when media infrastructure is damaged, the consequences are immediate. Communities are cut off virtually from one day to the next. Journalists struggle to reach affected areas. Misinformation spreads quickly. Oh my God, did we see that with Melissa? And vulnerable groups are placed at even greater risks. That's where the national resilience story comes into being. That's when we see that information in times of crisis is a critical need and must be treated as such. I don't think that at this point in time we have collectively granted enough information, and the powers that be in general, to the importance of information. That is why we believe that Caribbean media resilience must also include better practical preparedness. We must have backup power, emergency connectivity, disaster protocols, personal protective equipment to ensure the safety of journalists. Community radio capacity also is an important aspect. Access to verified official information, and also stronger coordination between media houses and regulators. So this is also important. I want to also stress that, as it has already been done, that artificial intelligence, social media platforms, and algorithmic content systems are actually reshaping how information is produced, distributed, and consumed. In 1 year, the landscape has changed. And these technologies bring a lot of advantages, but also, we all know, risks. Manipulated narratives, disinformation are something that we have to consider much more than we used to when it comes to the overall concept of world press freedom. There are many opportunities in AI, for instance. It can support transcription, translation, research, audience engagement, and more. Digital platforms can help Caribbean media reach diasporas, younger audiences, and others. And we have also seen over the last couple of years the use of data journalisms, drones, GIS, and verification tools. That's something that we at UNESCO are trying to pioneer and support in many ways, together with many partners. So the question today is not whether Caribbean media will transform. It is whether transformation will strengthen public interest journalism or weaken it. And we need a lot of action, collective action. We need stronger evidence, and we are going to engage in our office. This is a promise that I want to make to the whole Caribbean region today through this CBU event, that we will have this year a study on making Caribbean future ready. It's very important. Caribbean media future ready. It's very important, and we hope to launch that for next year's World Press Freedom Day. We're going to need also more policy dialogue. I think transparent and fair allocation of state advertising, support for local content is very important. We need more media and information literacy. Citizens, especially young people, must be better equipped to distinguish verified journalism from manipulation, propaganda, and AI-generated falsehoods. And yes, we need regional cooperation. So we're very committed to this agenda. We're already working on this. There's a lot of difficult questions that we need to tackle on this World Press Freedom Day and in the months to come. but these are not impossible issues. The future of Caribbean media is not predetermined. It can be shaped. It can be shaped by all of us, all of you. So, in concluding, I want to say that World Press Freedom Day is not only a day to celebrate the right to speak, it is a day to renew simply our commitment to the systems that allow truth to be reported, verified, shared, and trusted. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Falt. I want to just reinforce the last part of what you have said, which I think is part of why we're here, that the Caribbean industry does have the ability, and it's actually its requirement to shape its own destiny and determine its own future. And this event is one of the things that is going to plant the seeds of what is it that we need to do, and hopefully have us engage through the various organizations here that I refer to as action organizations, from our regulators to the various groupings of people within the industry, to actually see what we will do to protect press freedom. We're going to move now into the presentations, and I did want to again indicate we're not going to be pausing after each presentation, right, SG? We're going to be going through and we'll take questions at the end, just confirming that is correct. Okay, so I've gotten to go ahead on that. So for that reason, it really does mean that as you're listening to the presentations, if there are any burning issues that you have an interest in bringing up, that you would be either writing them in the chat or certainly making note of them. Hand up at CBU Secretariat. SG, is that you or? No? Okay, hand on. All right, so let us move now into our first presentation. I have the pleasure of introducing to you Mr. Cordel Green. Mr. Cordel Green is an attorney at law and a former Assistant Attorney General of Jamaica. He's also the Executive Director of the Broadcasting Commission of Jamaica, which regulates the electronic media landscape in Jamaica. Vice Chair of the International Bureau for UNESCO's Information for All program, and Chairman of UNESCO's IFAP Working Group on Information Accessibility. Mr. Green comes with a lot of institutional knowledge, as well as a prior working member of the industry. His affiliations include Vice Representative Caribbean at the International Center for Information Ethics, member of the Law Committee for the IEE Global Initiative for Ethical Consideration in Artificial Intelligence and Autonomous Systems, member of the International Institute of Communications, advisory board member at the Society of Scientific Assessment, an honorary member of the Multicultural Media, Telecom, and Internet Council. So without further ado, I'm sure that many of us know Mr. Green and know that he comes highly acclaimed in this area of media and information, and most importantly, regulation. So over to you, Mr. Green.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Claire. Good morning, everyone. It's really a pleasure and a privilege to be part of such a vital gathering of those who help to share the Caribbean information landscape. Historically, our shared mission, yours as operators and creators, and mine as a regulator, was to ensure that the public square remained vibrant, pluralistic, and grounded in truth. Today, that square is under constant redesign. In the emerging square, legacy media are competing with a new technological species that operate without a license, without any binding ethical code, and with no inherent commitment to the public good. These systems now shape, they sequence, they personalize the information environment and do so with extraordinary sophistication. But it is neurotechnology which moves the frontier furthest. Brain-computer interfaces, neural data harvesting, and cognitive enhancement systems. These are no longer science fiction. They are investment categories. They are patent portfolios. Why does this matter for what I want to say today? Because it reframes the stakes entirely. Press freedom was designed to protect the informed, autonomous mind. If the mind itself is the new frontier of manipulation, press freedom cannot be silent on that frontier. The press, at its best, in its most disciplined form, is a social immune system. So in a world where shared factual foundation is under technological assault, the value of trustworthy, rigorous journalism does not diminish. It is supposed to increase. The tragedy is that this moment of maximum need coincides with a crisis of trust in all institutions. Now, any serious focus on press freedom and media viability begins here with this proposition. The oxygen of journalism, the ultimate bulwark against its diminution, is trust. As neutrality is to the judiciary, so trust is to the media. We do not require judges to be without opinions. What we require as an absolute condition of their office is that those opinions never contaminate their judicial function. The moment a judge is perceived to have tilted the scales, the entire proceeding is compromised, not just the outcome, the proceeding itself. The same principle applies to a media institution. And I'm pausing here because I want to be clear about what I am and am not saying. I'm not suggesting that editorial positions are improper. That would be ridiculous. I'm not suggesting that commentary has no place in a healthy media ecosystem. That would be preposterous. What I am suggesting is that something has happened that's not being discussed sufficiently or adequately. There has been a deliberate structural conflation of news reporting with opinion presentation. This has happened globally, and it is a central professional failure. On too many news platforms, the anchor desk has become an opinion platform. The reporter has become a commentator. The news presenter and the expert analyst are now professionally indistinguishable. They are blended seamlessly into a single media experience. The logic of this development is commercially coherent. Deductively, it makes sense. The consequences are professionally catastrophic, in my view. When a news anchor expresses visceral political opinion in the same broadcast as the day's news, the reasonable viewer, listener, and reader is entirely justified in asking, where does the reporting end and the agenda begin? That question, once asked, is corrosive. If journalists are publicly and consistently expressing strong personal opinions across broadcasts, social media, public appearances, the reasonable person cannot be expected to quarantine those opinions from their assessment of that journalist's news reporting. We are whole people, credibility indivisible. So the profession cannot have it both ways. The profession cannot have the authenticity of expressed personal conviction and the authority of impartial reportage. If it chooses the former, it should not be surprised when the public withholds the latter. We live in an information age where there is abundance, not scarcity. The public does not need more information. It is drowning in it. From my perspective, what is urgently needed, even if not yet recognized and spoken about openly, is a reliable anchor of verified, objectively presented fact, a fixed reference point against which the torrent of social media noise, AI-generated fabrication, and weaponized disinformation can be measured and assessed. Let me illustrate this with the most instructive and most troubling example available. And by the way, I consider my visa to be valuable. So there's a risk. President Trump's conduct towards the press has been reprehensible, to say the least. His open contempt for journalists he deems adversarial, personal attacks on reporters, weaponization of government machinery against media institutions and practitioners deserve unequivocal condemnation, particularly on this day. And yet, his label, fake news, fake media, resonates with many, not because it is accurate as a blanket charge. And there are other explanations, but I'm convinced that there is fertile ground because enough people have watched enough broadcasts that wear their political sympathies openly to find the charge at least partially plausible. This is not victim blaming. Journalists targeted by state power deserve solidarity regardless of their editorial positions. But the industry must ask, and do so honestly, ask why the president's framing has found such fertile ground and have the courage to act on the answer. When a media ecosystem becomes hyper-polarized in whatever form, for whatever reason, it loses the ability to serve as a shared floor for fact-based debate. When we lose that floor, when we diminish that floor, we lose and diminish pluralism. Inclusion becomes impossible. Inclusion becomes fake, a pretense, perfunctory, because there really is no common language, no common floor. So I speak to this knowing it makes a lot of people uncomfortable, but I really believe regulators must be concerned that if the public cannot see themselves reflected in a fair, not just reflected, reflected in a fair, impartial media, they will, as they are doing, retreat into digital silos where they become even more vulnerable to manipulation. Now, the kind of crisis or challenge I am describing in the holistic sense did not arrive without warning. And this has to be said for posterity, because there's a kind of narrative of the Caribbean as reactive, which is not accurate. Long before generative AI became a common headline, and this is not singular, but I'm speaking from my experience. It very much could apply in other jurisdictions. The Broadcasting Commission of Jamaica was mapping this very territory. For example, in our contribution to the International Institute of Communication's 50th anniversary publication, you can check it, Intermedia, volume 48. And in a series of articles, we spoke of cognitive sovereignty, warning that the battle for democracy was moving from the ballot box to the neurological architecture of the citizen. We warned that if we did not develop in the Caribbean a digital harbor approach, a protected space where local content and verified truth could anchor themselves, our national and regional narratives would be swept away by a global algorithmic tide. Our calls for a sui generis AI policy and proactive legislative reform were met with curious silence, save for those who pilloried us in newspaper articles. But I have to be blunt with this audience. This silence was also inhabited by the media industry. And it is my view, problematic, offensive perhaps, disturbing, this lack of a unified, sustained, informed industry voice has made it far too easy for policymakers to delay fundamental changes to our legislative framework. Changes that go to the heart, in my opinion, of any seriousness about press freedom and valuing and preserving the legacy of local media. As Eric and previous speakers said, and I too already acknowledged, the digital ecosystem is structurally tilted in favor of big tech. Regulators such as ourselves, we're closely watching global responses like the news bargaining codes in Australia and Canada. But we recognize this may not be practicable for small countries. So what has been our approach? Perhaps too quietly done in an attention-seeking society. The approach has been that of a strategic vanguard, providing support, sometimes quietly, such as Eric alluded to in our collaboration with UNESCO, all predicated on the imperative of local media surviving in a digital first world. The push for digital television transmission, which began 23 years ago, is a prime example. Preceded all the excitement around social media, preceded generative artificial intelligence. That push is the outcome of sustained regulatory thought leadership aimed at one thing: ensuring that the broadcast media could migrate into the IP ecosystem as a part of leveling a playing field that was not dependent on legislation and government largesse, offering the interactivity and data-rich experiences that modern advertisers demand. We also recognize that the citizen, an empowered citizen, is the first line of defense for press freedom. Citizens who are being taken too much for granted, framed usually as consumers. The big C should be citizens, not so much consumers. This is why the Broadcasting Commission, again in unison with UNESCO and other partners, has championed digital media and information literacy, developed, acting on its own volition, no mandate from government, no push from the media industry, no demand from civil society, no mandate in the legislation. We developed a digital media and information literacy framework and submitted it to the government of Jamaica 2 years ago as a whole of society blueprint. But we are not waiting for the slow wheels of legislation to turn. As I often say to my colleagues, we have two choices. We can be efficiently irrelevant, constrained by legislation not fit for purpose, or innovate like anybody else. So as the Broadcasting Commission celebrates its 40th anniversary in June, we are launching a landmark digital media and information literacy project with the Mona School of Business, specifically focused on the electronic media as one of those support mechanisms, complemented by a new content code, which will be a paradigm shift. It is designed to be platform agnostic. It includes a citizen code and specific guidelines for social media actors, not just rules for the regulated sector. We are using digital media and information literacy coupled with the new code as tools to level the playing field or help level the playing field, providing a standard of conduct that holds social media influencers and digital actors to a higher level of responsibility while the legislative framework catches up. Now, I want to, in wrapping up, address pluralism and inclusion specifically by saying this. I've been speaking to it, but specifically. Social media has changed the arithmetic of public expression, which we know. Anyone with a smartphone now has access to a platform. Communities that were once entirely dependent on institutional media to carry their stories, have direct channels to public discourse. This is a real and significant shift. In fact, some of them may wonder what we're getting hot under the collar about when we talk about, let's say, community radio. Thing of the past. But access to a platform is not the same thing as accurate, contextualized representation. The media itself is not making that point sufficiently to citizens, not consumers, but to citizens. As I observed in a recent op-ed, and I quote, "Distrust is the Achilles heel of AI-powered social media. The March 2026 jury verdict against Meta, affirming deliberate addiction engineering, marked the collapse of the engagement at all costs era. The model is ethically unsound. The model is morally broken." This creates an opening for traditional media, which, by the way, traditional media isn't talking about. That meta judgment has come and has been made into a 9-day wonder. The comparative advantage of the traditional media lies in trust. By doubling down on verification, transparency, and community anchoring, as Eric mentioned in his comments, legacy institutions can reclaim relevance and stand, not just stand, but present themselves and convince citizens, not consumers, that they are a necessary antidote to distortion. Trust is an old, being renewed currency. It has to be earned daily, defended deliberately, and sustained as strategy. In other words, and this may be counterintuitive, if we mirror the chaos and opinionated tilt of social media, we lose the very credibility that makes the press essential, because a media ecosystem that society does not trust cannot advance pluralism. So let me end as I began, on redesign, not requiem. The media as we have known it is no more. What replaces it is still becoming. The disruption is not finished. The only certainty and presumption, it may be rebuttable, but the only certainty and presumption is that pluralism and inclusion cannot flourish where citizens have stopped believing in the possibility of reliable truth, not synthetic truth, reliable truth. So those of us who care most about pluralism and inclusion should care urgently, as Eric said, about the conditions that make trust possible, and hold the media industry to the highest standards in restoring it. Press freedom is only as sacred as the press's commitment to the obligations that justify it. Thank you.
Hey, thank you very, very much, Mr. Green. I'm sure there are a lot of strong points. In the interest of time, because I think we're running a little want to leave enough time for the questions. So I'm not going to summarize, but there are a lot of very powerful things and powerful ideas that were put on the table, which we will discuss a little bit when we get to the end of the second presentation after Cordel. So we're going to go right now into a presentation by Mr. Dennis Shabral, journalist and executive member of the Ghana Press Association. So Mr. Shabral is an award-winning Caribbean journalist. He's been working in the media industry since 1984 in the technical production, on-air, news and current affairs fields of broadcasting, and also in the area of journalism. He's a pioneer of online journalism in Ghana, having founded the Demerara Waves Online News. During his almost 40 years in the media, during his more than 40 years in the media, he has worked for several Caribbean and international organizations, including Radio Antilles, Christian Science Monitor, Caribbean News Agency, CANA, we will all have been familiar with, the BBC's Caribbean Service, and Agence France Presse. Then he started his media career as a high school intern at the now defunct state-owned and controlled Ghana Broadcasting Corporation. So we are turning over the presentation screen to Dennis to give us some thoughts on this very important issue of WordPress freedom in the region.
Thank you, Claire. Good morning, everyone. First of all, let me start off by expressing my deep condolence on behalf of myself and my colleagues in Guyana and the rest of the Caribbean on the passing of well-known Caribbean journalist Linda Straker, who is from Grenada. She passed away this morning. And secondly, I'd like to commend all the presenters so far for addressing this topical issue for World Press Freedom Day, hearing from them various perspectives, and of course, sharing with them some of the views expressed. So what I would like to add to what has been already said is that clearly the media is operating in an environment of conflict. Its opponents are social media purveyors of content whose portions are a mixture of salacious, ultra-sensational, partisan, and often inaccurate material. Technological advancement and its democratization of access have aided and abetted the demise of legacy media. Fundamentals, however, remain the same despite technological innovations that have given rise to new, wide, and varied access to receive and transmit ideas at cost-effective rates. In newsrooms here in Guyana, and I suspect elsewhere in the Caribbean and beyond, the deprofessionalization of the media has taken on a new dimension. Artificial intelligence-generated content has now crept into the newsrooms and production departments. It has invaded with unabated speed and ferocity that has threatened the existence of our profession. It is all about the mighty dollar in the shortest possible time, without using our brain cells to conceptualize, interrogate, frame, write, produce, and submit. As is the case with universities, the time has come for newsrooms and production departments to introduce a new layer of editorial gatekeeping, compulsory artificial intelligence checking. In short, artificial intelligence cannot be the alpha and omega of content generation. Therefore, in exploring pathways to viable, independent, and public interest media, the Caribbean media decision makers must, as a matter of priority, seek to design a regional policy on artificial intelligence in journalism. Such a policy must form the bedrock of our newsroom policies and style guides, accompanied with punitive measures for those bent on over-reliance on this technology to generate content. Failure to do so will amount to a disservice to our Caribbean peoples. Already, we've seen how technology has impacted on the viability of legacy news entities across the region. Radio stations have had to shrink operations by changing formats from news and current affairs to entertainment. Newspapers have had to shrink operations by reducing the number of employees in at least 2 instances in Trinidad and Tobago and Guyana Newspapers have had to close their physical doors and go offline literally. The impact of technology is twofold. Information consumers get their just had jump here in the screen. The impact of technology is twofold. Information consumers get their news and other content from online journalism and other sources, resulting in lower sales, listenership, and viewership for legacy media. Concomitantly, advertisers have shifted their spending to online news and information sources either directly or through social media giants such as Facebook or Google. The few surviving legacy media and online only cannot afford to expand without sacrificing editorial influence to governments and the private sector, ultimately to the detriment of the public's interests. The proven fact is that people are interested in good journalism, independent and high quality, but the private sector, at times in collusion with governments or fear of being sidelined from the award of contracts, do not provide the much-needed sponsorship and advertising. There are suspicions also that funds are being diverted to or away from media houses depending on which political party is in power. This leads to self-censorship and censorship. Sadly, in an effort to remain on air, in operation, a number of media owners have allowed their content to be relegated to unbridled DJ formats and so-called talk platforms. Then, too, there is obviously politically polarized ownership of the media. As a result, those media owners and management would not participate in a unified approach to address the problems facing the media, too. While technology has changed, the standards and ethics of good journalism remain constant. So, what are the options on the table? Having told you what I've just said and listened to our colleagues earlier, 1, the establishment of a 2-tiered Caribbean Media Trust Fund that mobilizes sufficient capital to sustainably fund journalism operations over the long term. The Caribbean Court of Justice has shown how this funding mechanism works. 2, an annual contribution of between 0.5 and 1% of gross revenue from mobile internet data sales by telecommunication companies operating in the Caribbean to fund a regional public interest journalism mechanism, such as a fully revitalized Caribbean Media Corporation. 3, an annual tax on big tech, that is, global social media platforms and online marketplaces like Amazon, proceeds of which will go directly to a Caribbean Media Development Fund. 4, a binding Caribbean Media Charter that is enshrined as a convention to insulate domestic and regional public media from political, corporate, or other influence or interference, and guaranteeing them the required resources. 5, involvement in universities across the Caribbean to conduct an in-depth study on the psychological response of people to news and current affairs content to guide media literacy within the media houses and the wider public, as well as pathways to media viability. These will require some political will. While journalists will prefer less or no political involvement in our work, they pass laws and regulations and make other decisions that can and do impact our profession. It cannot be lost on us as a region that despite grave concerns about misinformation and disinformation, as well as the state of regional integration that CARICHAM ministers of information have not met in almost 30 years, none of their 3 core recommendations will fructify if there is not an annual conference to map out a regional media strategy for sustained financing. Therefore, as a matter of urgency, there should be such a conference of ministers responsible for information and telecommunications. Others that should be included in the discourse should be UNESCO, the Caribbean Association of National Telecommunications Organizations, the Caribbean Private Sector Organization, the Caribbean Media Corporation, the Caribbean Broadcasting Union, the Association of Caribbean Media Workers, the Caribbean Media Institute and Public Media Alliance, as well as other experts to hammer out the finer details of the 5-pronged action plan that I've proposed. The regional experiment in progress that is called the Caribbean Community or CARICHAM can never realize its full potential across all sectors if the intended beneficiaries are not adequately informed. And those are our ordinary people across the Caribbean, whether they be in tiny Montserrat or in big Jamaica. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Dennis. Dennis and Cordel with their news reading voices, coming to warm our ears. Let us move quickly into presentation from Allison Demas. Allison Demas is the CEO of the Media Institute Limited, a true Caribbean woman with that strong Caribbean last name of our researcher, Demas. She's passionate about the region's development and creativity and is committed to full regional integration. Founder and Chief Executive Officer of the Media InSite Limited, Allison, an attorney at law specializing in copyright and entertainment law, is a driven and visionary entrepreneur. Since 2011, Allison has been dedicated to tracking, measuring, and analyzing media content, including news, advertising, marketing, and public relations campaigns, as well as social media conversations. Over to you, Allison. I see you have your presentation up. As we look forward to starting with our discussion immediately after, again, encouraging those of you who are on the in the webinar to start putting your questions in the chat. Allison. You're muted.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. I have two challenges. I am the last speaker after some really, we've had some brilliant presentations. And of course, for us in the Southern and Eastern Caribbean, it's near lunchtime. So I have the challenge of trying to keep your attention. Today, what I want to talk about is really the question of survival. Because across the region, media isn't just evolving, it's being reshaped, as we've heard so graphically, in real time. And what we'll explore today is simple. What we'll explore are what the signals are already telling us about the future of media viability. So we often talk about these three concepts or issues separately, but they are deeply connected. Because without viable media, pluralism weakens. With big pluralism, inclusion suffers. And these points have been well made by the previous presenters. We are living in a time where media viability isn't optional. And as we've heard already, the issues is really structural. If the business models for our media houses fail, the entire information ecosystem weakens. This leads to less diversity, which in turn leads to less representation, and therefore makes us more vulnerable. So let's bear that in mind. So what's happening in our region? We are seeing three major shifts. We are seeing economic pressure being brought to bear on our media houses. We are seeing industry restructuring. We are seeing, as have been articulated before, rising concerns about media freedom. This is not isolated. In fact, it's systemic. Let me just ask you this, and you can comment in the chats briefly. Does this feel familiar to your country? So the reality, this is our reality. We are a region under pressure. It's not theory. We've heard before of the number of closures, consolidation, downsizing. And what's important here is that this is happening simultaneously across markets. And this tells us something critical. This is structural change, not temporary disruption. So we've heard it before of all these various closures, and I was reviewing my presentation this morning. It also occurred to me that about a year or two before we had the closure of news, we had the closure of the Barbados Advocate newspaper, which is probably what started the whole trend towards of closures across the region. And we see here the various stories being reported about these closures. What's interesting is, let's look now at the conversations that are happening across the media when it comes to media viability, right? So while the industry is under pressure, and we see here particularly at the beginning of this year, the conversations about media viability are growing. We see a surge in 2026, especially around major events. So the attention is increasing, but of course, attention alone does not equal sustainability. So let's look at the media intelligence we are seeing in relation to the topic of media viability in this region. The sentiment is mainly neutral, and this is not surprising because most of these reports are coming from journalists who are supposed to be, of course, journalistically neutral. We see that Trinidad and Tobago dominates the conversation. And we see that digital platforms, ironically, online news, and of course, Loop News was an online news platform, are leading the conversations. So that's our first major signals. The conversations about media is already digital first. Now let's look a bit more closely. So what we are seeing about reach, how wide, how far these conversations spreading. And we see the spikes, as I mentioned, particularly we had in July 2025, which is when we had the closure of Loop News and Sportsmax. And then in January, started the closure of Newsday, and this was followed in March with the closure of Starbrook News. We also see these spikes in engagement, but we notice that it's not consistent. And again, this tells us something critical, that our audience attention is now event-driven and it's not being sustained. What are the implications, therefore, for media viability? So we have here a self-reinforcing cycle. Lower revenue, which leads to weaker journalism. We've noted the shrink in newsrooms, decline in trust, which of course is a critical element, and of course, further revenue decline. So this is not just a mere decline cycle, it is in fact a vicious feedback loop. And we need to pay attention to these signals. Now, if we look at just 8 Caribbean markets, all right, where Media InSite, we have tracked traditional media. And what we've noticed, the pink is newspaper revenue, orange is radio, and blue is television. And again, we note here, the first quarter, period January to date, we see the decline across all 3 media types. Yes. So this is not just a crash. In fact, it's a slow, consistent downward trend. And if we zero in on 2 Caribbean countries, we see that in Trinidad and Tobago, again, year to date, we see a downward trend, 47%. And in Jamaica, we see a downward trend of 41%, which are both significant percentages. And the point has already been made, but we need to emphasize it, that the economic engine that once funded journalism now powers the platforms that disrupt it. And what is that economic engine I'm talking about? It's the advertising revenue, which once funded our local newsrooms, now fuels the global platforms, leaving regional journalism to compete for attention without the revenues that once sustained it. So let's look at the global advertising market. We see that in 2025, it surpassed $1 trillion. We also note that it is 3 of these global platforms that accounted for 55% of this revenue. And they are, no surprise, Meta, Google, owned by Alphabet, and Amazon. And it's predicted that by 2030, their share will increase a further 5% to 60%. So we're not just competing locally or regionally anymore. We're competing with these global giants. In the interest of time, I am going to share, I'm going to zoom in on Trinidad and Tobago, where we've done a case study comparing the 3 traditional media types with meta-channel advertising. Okay? And this is somewhat frightening because we know that radio has been king for such a long time in our region, but we notice here a sharp dip from the end of last year, first quarter of 2026, and it's going into the second quarter of this year. We see that television in blue, moderate, minimal investment, yet still shrinking, but we see at the bottom here is newspaper. And what's holding steady as the second most popular advertising platform is Meta. And it will be interesting to see what happens the rest of 2026, whether the Meta actually now overtakes radio, which has been dominant for several years. So what is the path forward? I think there are 3 key questions. That of competition. How do we compete with the global platforms? Well, Cordel Street has eloquently gave us insight into the challenges as well as the opportunities that are faced by our regulators. And then the critical question, which I think all media houses in this region are grappling to answer: which business models actually work? How can media be sustained? And this is where media intelligence comes in, because media intelligence helps us understand our audiences, measure what matters, identify risk early, and optimize decisions. So in short, what media intelligence does, it turns data into direction. So what we are advocating is that the future of Caribbean media will not be won by revenue. It will be won by intelligence, which will provide clarity, give us the speed that we need, and also enable us to be adaptable. Thank you, and I'd love to hear your thoughts and your questions, because this conversation certainly doesn't end here. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Allison. And with that, we have had 3 presentations, and inclusive of the remarks that we'd have had before, that gives us a nice understanding of the context that we're working with, some of the challenges that the whole industry is faced with, as I had indicated at the top, that it really is not just about journalists being shot or journalists being killed or people trying to pull down the shutters of media houses physically. It is a much larger issue than that. Some of these issues are within the hands of the media houses themselves and the newsrooms in terms of what they do or they don't do. And then you have had a good understanding of all of the things that are happening within our space and outside of our space that is affecting the whole idea of us having a free press and a sustainable press that can allow for free press. So let us move straight into the Q&A. Since, as Allison has pointed out in the Eastern Caribbean, it is lunchtime, and we want to make sure that everybody is able to participate before we depart. So Colleen has written, I'm choosing a question, for the Parliament of TNT, the case of not advertising on traditional media is down to economics. We advertise, share job vacancies, etc. Our social media platforms and on our website. Only statutory ads are done via traditional media. So I think in Trinidad, what Colleen is explaining is that there is constraints within which they work that allows them to advertise on various platforms to achieve particular ends. Haven't seen any other question. Any hands up? Are we going to take down the presentation, SG? And if there are any sorry? Any hands up? Anybody who has any questions? Not seeing any hands up. But while we wait for any thoughts to come in, there was something that I did not hear from any of the presenters, and just asking Cordel, Demas, and Allison if you all have given this any thought, which is that, a lot of the conversation around press freedom is about newsrooms and the structure of the newsrooms and what the newsrooms are doing, because obviously, as we talk about press freedom, it has so much to do with the news that is reported. But generally, if you look at the amount of taking, and even not even taking newspapers out of the picture, but looking at the platforms, news takes up a relatively small percentage of the total platform use. So if it is broadcast, TV, what is news might be 2 hours out of the 24-hour day. And similarly, in terms of radio, what also is news might be that 60 minutes, 90 minutes out of the 24-hour day. And this whole question of viability and the other hours of the day and what those hours can be used for to help sustain the media, and what kind of threat are those hours coming under in terms of helping to sustain media. Yes, Denis, I see you have your hand up.
I think we have to bear in mind, let me just put on my camera. I think we have to bear in mind that the journalism has to go beyond the news. It has to go in the direction of the productions, the documentaries, the features, and so on, because those are the other elements that sustain public interest in what is going on, address some of our challenges, seek to find solutions. Other than that, we'll be just looking at a half hour or a 30-minute newscast, probably a 10-minute newscast. So I would say that the funding for news, or the funding for journalism rather, has to be all-encompassing and all-embracing. Therefore, we've got to look at the other types of productions when we talk about financing for public interest content in the Caribbean.
Okay, Denis, thanks. Anything else on that? Cordel and Allison, any thoughts on the other components of the platforms, and are those components also under stress because of the same things that you've spoken about in terms of trust and those things?
Well, I don't run these businesses, so receive what I say in that spirit. I agree with Denis's observation. First of all, I actually think it is problematic that the programming models have remained pretty much the same for decades. I hear people I have heard recently, I'm watching television, for example, and I hear something akin to breaking news, there's a fire at such and such a place, details in later newscasts or something to that effect. And I sit there saying, am I living in another world, or isn't it understood by these people that they have just lost their audience? Because it is almost certain that if there's a fire, there is ongoing information, news about it. There are all kinds of people, taxi man driving up, giving you his own version. And so I think a different intelligence is required, first of all, about how we think about news and what news is. And I don't claim to have expertise in the area. I'm speaking now perhaps more as a consumer. I am not impressed with what it is that's going on. The other thing, too, is you can't meet the immediacy of social media. But one of the flaws I find when you depend on, let's say, user generated content and social media content, it is for the now. So immediately, something has happened, there's been an accident, and I take out my phone and that information is being provided. But there may be things that happen subsequently at the hospital. It may be related to the quality of care at the hospital by the victim, or the victim's families of having something to say about this. There may be a story 3 months after the incident. I mean, there are so many things that I think about. Whatever happened to so and so and so? So we are stuck in a mode that, in my view, doesn't help, because you won't be able to beat artificial intelligence where scale is concerned, but you can beat AI where judgment is concerned about what is it that people could connect to emotionally. Then the other thing I wish to say in conclusion is, I don't understand, for example, Claire, you can tell me, but I am meeting up a lot of young people who say that they're into esports. I'm not into esports, right? But they're the ones telling me about esports and what they're doing and how deeply they're involved in gaming. And somehow I don't see that or see them reflected in much of the media that I watch. And so is there something about the sports that they are involved in that is anathema to the traditional platforms? And that's just an illustration. I believe we are not as deeply connected with this society as we should be in terms of content generation.
Oh, okay, Cordel, thanks for that. I'm not going to immediately comment on that because we do have some questions that are in the chat that I think we should address. Dan Robertson, are there creative methods that journalists or media can use to address this decline of support from the market? That's a direct comment. As we in the Caribbean may have heard, or as mothers say, necessity is the mother of invention. Are there any outside of the box methods that have been tried and tested here by anyone? So I think that question is one that goes out generally to the panel, though I do feel that the panel is also kind of asking or suggesting that something had to be changing in terms of the business model. So since that business model is something that Allison, you did spend a lot of time on, do you have any thoughts on what this question is trying to understand? You're muted.
So I'm seeing quite a few questions in the chat on topic of media viability. So which one in particular are we looking at?
With the one I read, are there any creative methods that journalists or media can use to address this decline of support from the market? That came from Dan Robertson. As we in the Caribbean may have heard our mothers say, necessity is the mother of invention. Are there any outside of the box methods that have been tried and tested by anyone here?
Okay, I'm not sure I'm the best person to answer that question, although I think that Cordel already addressed it in that we have to look beyond, if we're going to compete, for example, on television with Netflix, I think the only way we can do so is if we develop, our local content and really show us as we want to portray ourselves. So it's beyond news. It's also about, features, Caribbean films, television series. And we certainly see that happening in, other countries. We see the popularity of, Nollywood, and we see, the film industry in like Korea and other places developing. And I think we really have to focus on that, really developing, our local content and making
Okay.
it relevant.
All right, thanks for that. Nicolette is asking, with the advent and subsequent misuse of AI, coupled with technology changing consumption habits, what does it look like to train the journalists of tomorrow? And I don't know if the training CARIMAC is in the room, and UNESCO, of course, that has already expressed an interest between Eric, Paul, and Dr. Prendergast. Do you all have any thoughts on that, re-AI? And of course, Cordel did speak extensively about proactive things that had been put on the table by the BCJ about AI and how it will impact our business. So probably Paul or Eric. Eric, I don't see Paul actually. Eric, do you have any thoughts on that? What does
I see
training?
that Patrick is on the line, so
Oh,
I think
Patrick
he
is-
would really be the best one to answer. I don't know if he's hearing me.
Okay.
Yes,
I'm hearing.
turned on his camera finally, Eric. Thank you for calling him.
No, I mean, I think it's an important question to answer. It is something that we are always concerned with. Currently, we are looking at ways in which we can develop a conversation that speaks to curriculum review in the context of generative AI. There are several things that we are going to have to consider, certainly from a training and education perspective. That is, we have been very much concerned with academic integrity as it relates to the use of AI. We have been in discussion recently to look to see how do we actually develop our own framework, especially given that we are particularly in the field where we're focused on the pedagogy of creativity. We are in a space where the use of technology and the application of technology would be is always at the root of what we do. So we have to develop our own protocols. We have to develop our own framework for measuring, for assessment, for determining the extent to which students can in fact use particularly AI. So we're working on it. It is an ongoing conversation, and right now, as we partner with the Broadcasting Commission in Jamaica, with UNESCO and others, within our own university system, in terms of pedagogy, we are looking at what needs to be done from a curriculum perspective. And when we say curriculum, now we're not just talking about the traditional programs that people are in, but how do you support and fill those gaps where they've been identified in the wider experience that the students will have at all levels, at the undergraduate level, the graduate level, and certainly to encourage research, so that some of the questions being asked in terms of where the evidence is would be able to respond in a much more positive and proactive way.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Dr. Prendergast. I think I might just add something as I do myself do adjunct lecturing with the CARIMAC. with CARIMAC, and also just last year there was a presentation at Mona School of Business addressing this whole issue of AI and how it is impacting what we do. I think that the question, I think, is a lot more it's kind of concentrated on AI and its use in journalism. It's kind of what I got from Nicolette's question. But just want to point out that it actually is a Trinidadian Professor Noel, it was, who pointed out, there are three important aspects of AI that have to be taken into account. He called them the ABC of AI: accuracy, bias, and context, and indicating that within our region, it is very important that we understand that the AI machineries that have been created were created by a certain set of people with a particular context. Essentially a 45-year-old man from Silicon Valley who doesn't really look like us or our cultural needs. And therefore, it is so important for our region to develop its own AI tools that address our context. So just putting that in the mix. Let us take a look at Miss Piper, Leslie Piper, Neeleen. 3 questions. Much of the discussion on media viability and press freedom is compelling, but what empirical Caribbean-specific data sets actually exist to track these trends over time? Are we relying on global indices as proxies? I probably would put on the table, Ms. Piper, that certainly what Ms. Demas presented as a case study out of Trinidad is very specific to establishing there is some tracking, and I think that Ms. Demas has been a presenter on this particular forum over the years, and there has been data presented over time that is showing what is happening digitally and how that is comparing with what is happening within the legacy media space. I think that our frame and focus this year is probably a little different from what we had looked at before, but I putting my neck out on the limb here. And again, I would go to you, Allison and Cordel, about this question. This person is saying, are we just relying on a global kind of reference point, or are we looking at the region to have a better appreciation on the context of what is happening here? I'll go to Cordel first quickly and then over to Allison.
Yeah, I actually think it could be a little bit deeper. It may really be questioning our approaches, and I accept what is probably being alluded to, because if you are dealing with change at scale, then the way in which we do our research and data gathering does itself require innovation. So I just want to tell you that I am actually now looking at a proposal for a Jamaica creator economy AI sandbox that is about mapping value, influence, and digital exports in a kind of sandbox environment, which is sort of real world outputs, some way, some mechanism by which you are not sort of doing some retrospective thing, but you're able to be capturing data in real time. And I think that's what the question may be pointing to. And I agree that we need different approaches there as well.
All right, thanks very much for that, Cordell. And as going over to Allison, I'll just add those other 2 questions from Ms. Piper, which I think are somewhat related. On AI and media intelligence, what evidence do we have on how AI is actually being adopted in Caribbean newsrooms? I don't know if this is something you have started looking at yet, since this is an area of interest for you. And is its measurable impact on content quality or audience trust? And the 3rd question was, to what extent do you see limitations in data availability affecting how we understand media systems in the Caribbean? And would there be value in developing a coordinated regional-wide media research infrastructure or data repository? Allison, your thoughts?
Okay, well, certainly, if I can answer your questions numbers 1 and 3, certainly at Media InSite, our focus has been on really tracking, measuring, analyzing media across the Caribbean. And when I say media content, the media content we focus on are advertisements as well as news. And in fact, we have the largest repository of Caribbean media data globally. So that has definitely been our focus. Also, I'm happy to announce, and it will soon be disclosed, that at Media InSite, we have also been developing our own large language models, our own, AI, because we recognize, of course, our language, the way we express ourselves is so nuanced. As Claire was saying, we can't rely on a 45-year-old male in Silicon Valley. We have to develop our own systems. So I'm happy to say that certainly at Media InSite, we have been doing that. The challenge, I think, when it comes to measurement, particularly audience measurement that we have in this region, is that, and perhaps the Anthony Greens of this world better able to say why. But certainly in the last 10 years, we've seen a reluctance by the media houses to actually commission audience measurement surveys. And that, again, is another reason why I think that advertisers are shifting towards digital, because, of course, with digital, you get all those metrics, you know exactly who to target. But when it comes to like radio and television, who's your audience? Who's actually looking anymore at local television or listening to radio? And at what times, what's the demographics? That information is critical. And that's what I would like us to see us really develop across the Caribbean, that can become a reliable industry-based, repository of audience measurement data.
Okay, all right. Thanks very much, Allison. I think there are quite a number of questions in the chat. It's a pity we didn't have them come in earlier because we are running tight on time. Just trying to go through some things. Cordel, you did ask about esports, and there is a suggestion that esports is on Twitch, but I think the point that Cordel was making is that if there is such a local interest in it, why haven't we seen the media entities in the region embrace it for broadcast, or certainly reporting, at worst case, even just reporting on, to establish that there is a body of people who are interested in that, right? There are a number of questions in the chat. I don't think we can go through all of them now. I just would want to make a point on what Allison said. It's really very important. What are people buying? Why do people buy? They want to know what they buy. Again, the context of our environment is so uniquely categorized in boxes. The hurricane established to us, the hurricane in Jamaica established to us just how many people are not in that digital space, are not engaging in this fancy word that we're talking about, because they have not yet transitioned. Therefore, for them, they need to be still aligned to the legacy media spaces. Also want to point out, it's not something that we were focused on here, though it did come up in Eric Falt's presentation, that the viability of media is actually threatened by climate change and the disasters that come along with that. We haven't really discussed that, but coming out of what is connected to that is that all across the world, the International Telecommunications Union, the European Broadcasting Union have all established that the most significant and important platform in managing information during a disaster is radio. And just our region having an understanding of that and having an appreciation of what that means is going to be very important moving forward. But we're going to be able to get a copy of Allison's presentation immediately after this event. And there are the questions that are here that I think maybe CBU might put those together and see if we're able to get some responses and share them with everybody. But we are running tight on time, and it's time for me to hand over to Dr. Livingston, who is going to talk a little bit about the whole idea of media business viability. As we know, Dr. Livingston White was once in Dr. Prendergast's chair, and I think he sneaked out of the chair, asked Dr. Prendergast to just keep it warm for a while, and then just didn't return. And as a result of that, I'm batting for you. Dr. Prendergast is stuck in the chair now, and he's there with his nice Santa Claus beard, looking quite happy, while poor Patrick is over there, managing CARIMAC. But over to you, Dr. White. Let's hear what you have to say about media.
Thank you, Claire. Good day, colleagues, and congratulations to the Caribbean Broadcasting Union on another powerful World Press Freedom Day conversation. CARIMAC is proud to be a long-standing associate member of the CBU. This year holds special significance for us. CARIMAC has just celebrated its 50th anniversary. Half a century of training Caribbean media professionals, generating knowledge and asking hard questions about our media landscape. And as we step into our next chapter, we have established a working group for research, a deliberate, structured commitment to strengthening our research productivity and impact. One of the first outcomes of that commitment is a call for chapters in a forthcoming publication titled Emerging Methods for Media Research, Data Collection, Analysis, and Presentation in the Caribbean. And yes, Allison, I hear you talking about your methods at Media InSite. We need a chapter from you, and Cordel Green, your AI Creator Sandbox. You need to write a chapter about that. So this is not a conventional academic text. We're deliberately seeking contributions that capture the creative, innovative ways in which Caribbean scholars and practitioners are generating knowledge about our media realities, a kind of Caribbean epistemology of media. Ways of knowing that are rooted in our own histories, our own communities, our own media contexts. Because the Caribbean media experience is not a footnote in someone's story. It is a story worth telling on its own terms, in our own voice, with our own methods. And speaking of telling our story, the members of the CARIMAC Working Group for Research are in active discussions around 2 additional book projects that we intend to develop in partnership with the CBU. Even though I describe these as book projects, we are mindful that knowledge in the Caribbean has never lived in print alone. Our region has a rich oral tradition, and our publications must be designed for multiple formats, print, audio, and digital, to reach different audiences and honor the full range of literacies and communication cultures that make the Caribbean unique. The first project would focus on media management, policy, and research in the Caribbean, a much-needed scholarly treatment of how Caribbean media institutions are governed, financed, regulated, and operated in an increasingly turbulent global environment. This project would bring together practitioners, policymakers, and researchers to document the strategies, challenges, and innovations that define our media landscape today. It will be led by Dr. Alpha Obika, who is here with us, and of course our moderator, Dr. Claire Grant, 2 members of our faculty who are actively teaching and researching in our media management program. The second project would take up where the foundational texts left off, a contemporary history of Caribbean media, building on the pioneering work of John Lent in 1977, who wrote a book on Third World media and their search for modernity, the case of Commonwealth Caribbean, 1717 to 1976. And Agri Brown and Roderick Sanaton's 1987 publication, Talking with Whom, a report on the state of the media in the Caribbean. Nearly 4 decades have passed. The digital revolution has reshaped everything. It is time for an update that captures how Caribbean media has navigated change while continuing to protect press freedom and serve democratic values. This project will be led by a team of CARIMAC faculty and invited scholars who will work directly with CBU members to document their stories, the institutional histories, the editorial battles, the survival strategies, and the moments of innovation that have defined Caribbean broadcasting. Your stories deserve to be told, and we want to help tell them. At CARIMAC, we are fortunate to have various active postgraduate programs which are strategically designed to generate scholarship and research in Caribbean media. There is the Master's Degree in Media Management offered in collaboration with the Mona School of Business and Management, and an MPhil and PhD in Communication Studies, where students are right now investigating pressing questions such as what factors influence production decisions in small media markets? Are streaming services viable for Caribbean media audiences? How do Caribbean media organizations survive, let alone thrive in this digital environment? These are not abstract research questions. These are your questions. And our students and their research supervisors or faculty are eager to answer them through applied and practice-based research. Since 2022, a memorandum of understanding between CARIMAC and the CBU has opened our graduate courses in media management to practitioners across media organizations. That partnership has already benefited professionals across the region, and it is proof that the wall between the academy and the industry can come down. Research must serve practice, and practice must inform research. And that brings me to the most important thing I want to say today. CARIMAC knows that CBU members are confronting difficult, sometimes existential questions every day. Questions about sustainability, business viability, and relevance. Questions about how to strengthen Caribbean media, uphold democratic values, and build societal resilience, even as the ground shifts beneath our feet and the next storm, literal or otherwise, threatens not only our shores, but our broadcast towers. CARIMAC has something to offer. Research expertise, analytical tools, research ethics reviews and approvals, and a community of media scholars committed to the Caribbean. But we cannot set a research agenda for you. So we are extending a genuine open invitation today. Tell us your burning questions. What keeps you up at night as a broadcaster, as a media manager, as a journalist navigating change? What do you wish someone would study? What data do you wish existed? What are the gaps in the knowledge we have about Caribbean media? In the coming weeks, we will be reaching out to CBU members to begin gathering your research priorities, because the agenda must be shaped by the people living these realities every day. Let us build that agenda together in the true spirit of participatory approaches to media development, not research done on the Caribbean media industry, but research done with and for Caribbean media. Combining our research skills with your management and production experience to discover, to innovate, to experiment with new ways of doing media in the Caribbean. I must tell you, I'm very heartened by the presence here today. I counted about 25 academicians, media researchers affiliated with universities, both within the region and outside. So I'm happy that they showed up to support the announcement of this research initiative. CARIMAC is 50 years old. The Caribbean media industry is older still, and together, I believe our best work is ahead of us. And with that, on behalf of CARIMAC's Working Group for Research, I am pleased to announce the beginning of a program of research between CARIMAC and the CBU, one designed not only to document the realities facing Caribbean media today, but to actively explore viable options for media sustainability in the future. Because protecting press freedom is not just a matter of principle, it is a matter of survival. And that is a challenge we must meet together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. White. That really does, I think, put a very important perspective on the way forward, and one of the critical things that has to be done going forward, which is what is the gap, what is the problem, and what type of solutions exist. And it kind of pulls everything together. I am now going to be getting ready to close out with the vote of thanks, and I'm going to be starting at a very odd place. I think we got to a maximum of 67 participants, and there are now 61 still online. That in itself tends to be very rare, because normally you see numbers, chipping away as people are aware that we're getting close to the end. So for everybody who has stayed on, which is most people, thank you very much for being here. Without you, the webinar doesn't really happen. I then also want to say special thanks to all of our presenters. We had two lawyers in the house, and you know what happens when you have lawyers behind the mic when they're presenting, starting off with Cordel. You know, it gets really strong when you do that. But certainly, Cordel Green, Allison, Demas, thank you very much for your presentations. And Mr. Dennis Chapal, also thank you for a perspective which was really important because you're in the space working, right? I think your presentations have definitely given us more than a lot of food for thought because we are in the trenches. Some people are feeling the effects of what is happening and are required to make decisions around how do we remain viable. There is no need for talking about a challenge with press freedom unless you're actually in the game. And so right now I have put on the table that the biggest threat to press freedom is actually viability and sustainability of the industry. So thanks very much to our three main presenters. Certainly, Mr. Falt, thank you very much. UNESCO's involvement in this entire process of considering World Press Freedom Day, as well as the various themes and also the other supporting work that is done to give some context. The World Trends Report is a very, very, very important report. For people who have not looked at it, I encourage you to take a look at it. Why? Press freedom has often been anchored around the World Press Freedom Ranking. It's a document that is done, I believe, by Journalists Without Borders. However, the Trends Report gives a lot of tangible context to understanding what is really affecting freedom, right? This is very important. If you follow the World Press Freedom Report, it suggests that Jamaica is moving forward. You know, we're getting better at this press freedom thing. But when you look at the trends analysis, it gives you a better appreciation of what is really happening within the space of managing press freedom. So I'll encourage people to do that, take a look at that. And certainly as a UN document and the UNESCO involvement in making sure that this is front and center around our thinking is really important. So, Falt, you are just close to a year in the position, I believe, and I constantly feel your impact across various groups that are looking at this. We certainly felt your impact during Hurricane Melissa here in Jamaica, and you are on the ground. We feel the effect of UNESCO in the region, and we're really thankful for that. And certainly there are a lot of different groups that are working with UNESCO. We're looking forward to working with you more. I think Paul is here somewhere still. Paul, thank you as well, because you also are the man on the ground and is instrumental with that. Miss Lewis, President of CARICHAM, thank you again for always helping to put that private sector context to things that we're looking at as it's important for the media to know how they're working with states and the various things that are required to have an active and vibrant media. And of course, last but not least, Sir Anthony, President of the CBU. We're here on a CBU organized webinar. Webinars have certainly become a thing, more of a thing since COVID, but we're finding ways to make them more impactful. Each year, I think they get better and stronger, and the presentations become more solid, and the engagement with the audience also is growing as we go forward. Certainly looking forward to how we might treat with these questions that we have, and certainly sharing our synopsis of this webinar moving forward. So with that, I would like to sign off. Thanks to everyone. The webinar doesn't happen without everybody who's here, and looking forward to seeing I'm going to speak on your behalf, President Green. Looking forward to seeing many of the 67 people who were here in Guyana at the CBU Annual General Assembly, where I'm sure that this particular question and this concern will continue to be something that is spoken about. So everyone off in the Eastern Caribbean, off to lunch. It's 20 minutes before we hit noontime here. So thanks again, and see you next year at this event, but in August for the AGA. Thank you.